Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where folks are joining from. We are getting situated here. We appreciate your patience, and we'll go ahead and get started in just a minute or two. And as we get situated, I invite everyone to go ahead and drop their name and their location where they're joining from in the chat, and we'll kick off in about a minute here. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
All righty, thanks all. We appreciate your patience. I will kick it over to Joseph at AARP New Mexico to get us started.
Morning for those joining us in Mountain Time and Pacific time zones, and good afternoon for those joining on Eastern and Central time zones. My name is Joseph Roybal Sanchez, AARP New Mexico State Director. We are thrilled that you have joined the second of a four-part webinar series focused on key disaster preparedness topics for older adults and their families. AARP New Mexico has partnered with AARP's Livable Communities Technical Assistance Program and the St. Bernard Project for the last 3 years. In 2023, we had an in-person disaster readiness symposium in Las Vegas, New Mexico, following New Mexico's largest wildfire in New Mexico's history, scorching over 341,000 acres. In 2024, we had an in-person emergency management symposium in Albuquerque, New Mexico, as a build upon to our 2023 symposium. And now in 2025, we bring this four-part virtual training series on getting prepared for disasters as households and individuals. I want to go over some housekeeping items before I turn it over to our partners at the St. Bernard Project. The webinar session is being recorded. We would like to know who you all are joining us from across the country in New Mexico. So as Tessa had mentioned earlier, please drop your city and state in the chat. We invite attendees to use the Q&A function throughout the session. And at the end of today's seminar, we are asking that you complete a brief survey to be entered into a disaster supply kit raffle that will be provided by AARP New Mexico. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our partners at the St. Bernard Project to kick off today's informative session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph. Thank you for joining us here. We're going to go ahead and start off before we get into content here, just sharing some additional housekeeping items. And the first is we wanted to share one of AARP's tools. This is the disaster resilience tool, and we have it linked here. The link will be getting dropped in the chat as well. And as we walk through today and through the rest of the remaining 2 sessions throughout the month of July, some key preparedness actions across a variety of different disaster types, we really encourage folks to continue learning and to check out this free resource and to use that again as we walk through the sessions as you continue building your personal preparedness. And wrapping up housekeeping here, as Joseph mentioned, this is session 2 of our 4-part webinar series, and we really encourage folks to join us next week and the following week for the third and fourth sessions. And so we'll be sharing this again at the end of the session to keep this fresh and top of mind once we wrap up. But we'll be sharing out a lot of great content today centered on winter weather preparedness. And again, we encourage you to join us throughout the final 2 sessions. And with that, I want to go ahead and get us into a brief introduction on who we are at SVP before we get into some content here. So, to keep things high level, and I'll share it a little bit more links for you to check out more information once we wrap up today. If you're curious and want to learn a little bit more, we at SVP are a disaster resilience and recovery nonprofit. We got our start just about 2 decades ago after Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. In those early days, we focused on rebuilding. So after disaster, getting folks back home, getting people into safe, sanitary, and secure housing conditions once again. Well, in the past 2 decades, since our organization's inception, we realized that with our main mission being to shrink the time between disaster and recovery, if we really want to do that, we have to be proactive and we have to get ahead of the storm. And so what that means is we have to get prepared and we have to be thinking about how we can build long-term resilience. And so you can see here bucketed out some of our main program areas throughout the organization, but I'll hone in just the next slide here on our preparedness program to share out who we are and prepare as the leading folks leading the session today. And then we'll shift gears and get into our action items. In our prepare program, unfortunately, we know that there will be another storm. It's not a matter of if, but it's a matter of when. And so we do all that we can to arm different audience sets, households, businesses, community leaders with knowledge and tools and resources and information needed to make more informed disaster preparedness decisions with that ultimate goal of building future resilience for future disasters that our nation will see. And we have our resource hub. I have it linked here on the slide. And this will bring you to a variety of different preparedness and recovery resources. So we have 2 examples of different resource offerings that we have on the slide here, but we have a plethora of different guides, one-pagers, flyers, videos, etc. And so again, these span preparedness and recovery topics. And so as we really key in today on winter weather preparedness, and we have a nice guide on that on our website as well, I encourage you to check out that resource hub that has information across different disaster types and goes into different of the key areas that we'll be talking about today. And so to ground us here, we wanted to take a moment to share at a high level about one of SBP's clients, Miss Holloman. Miss Holloman, who's located in Houston, Texas, a few years back had been impacted by extreme weather conditions as extreme storm freezing event. Miss Holloman fortunately evacuated to her daughter's house, and she and her daughter remained out of harm's way, though they did lose power. But unfortunately, upon returning back home, Miss Holloman, realized that her home sustained pretty severe damage. Some of her pipes throughout her home froze and they burst, which resulted in flooding throughout her property. This resulted in very significant damage. And unfortunately, while Miss Holloman did receive money from her insurance company to cover the cost of fixing the pipe, she actually did not receive any funds to cover the water damage, which is something that we'll be talking about today. Because of Ms. Holloman's age and a variety of other factors, the repair process for Ms. Holloman was very difficult, and eventually mold grew in different areas throughout her home, which rendered different portions of her household unlivable. And so, that really grounds the conversation of what we're going to be talking about today of different winter weather preparedness actions. And we have here just laid out some of those key household items that we'll be going into depth today. So we'll look in at 5 key actions, and then we'll wrap up with some resourcing. And so we'll start here with talking about knowing our risks and taking a step back for a moment. Unfortunately, we know that New Mexico a week back was impacted by very severe flash flooding events. The week before that, unfortunately, we also saw devastating flash flooding across Texas. And so while we're going to be talking about winter weather today, it is crucial. We know that preparedness starts at the household level, and it's crucial that we're having these conversations now, learning what actions we can take to get prepared, because the ultimate goal there, what we're trying to do is reduce future impacts from storms, keep folks safe, keep ourselves, our properties, our families safe. And so zooming back into winter weather today, which is of course what we'll be focusing in on, we see that across New Mexico, this is something that the region is going to be dealing with in a few months down the line. We know no matter what time of year it is, there are always actions we take to get better prepared for different types of disasters. And while it is summertime, it's the middle of July, and winter weather might seem far down the road, it'll be here before we know it, that we're in those fall and then those winter months. And certainly is something that we need to be considering now. What are those steps that we can take to build our preparedness? And so, again, it starts with understanding our risks. And so, taking a moment here to do a little bit of level setting and talking about what winter weather actually is. We know that it occurs, so winter weather, winter storms, freezing conditions, when precipitation forms as sleet or snow, or when rain turns into ice. When does this happen? Early fall to late spring. So, again, seems far away at this point, but it'll be here before we know it. And this is a particularly important disaster type for us to talk about, because we know that the impacts of disasters of this specific type of disaster can immobilize an entire region. We also see where can this happen throughout the entire country. So certainly in New Mexico and throughout the country, wherever folks are joining from, this is something that we need to be getting prepared for. Looking more, at the basics of what winter storms and freezing conditions are, we see that they can occur from a duration of a few hours to several days. So it is a pretty big difference there, and it really drives the importance for, having a plan and getting your supplies in place. And we'll talk through all of that. And it's particularly important for us to understand that everyone can be impacted throughout the nation, but those individuals that have a higher level of risk are older adults, children, those who have pre-existing conditions, those who are sick, and pets, as a couple examples of some subsets of the population that experience higher levels of risks. And we have here, and we won't go into all these details here, but some statistics that really paint the picture of why this is such an impactful disaster for us to be talking about. We'll spend a lot of time later on in the session talking about how to prepare both at home, but also in your car if you get impacted by a snowstorm while you're driving. We see about 70% of injuries related to ice, snow, extreme winter weather events occur in cars, and about 25% of folks are caught out in the storm. And so we'll talk more about these statistics throughout the rest of the session here. And so understanding our risks and taking time in advance to look through what those different types of disaster events that can impact our region may be is one side of the coin. The other important thing here to understand is it's critical to stay plugged into information sources so we can receive information on incoming hazards as they're approaching. So our top recommendation here is to take time in advance to sign up for local emergency alerts through either your city or your county, so you can stay abreast again of incoming hazards as they're happening. The other piece there is, we really, again, want to encourage folks to download, these different weather apps, emergency alert systems, et cetera. But it's really critical that you understand when those different alerts come in, what are those different key terminologies pointing us to? What do they mean? And so taking a moment here to define the key terminology. An advisory means that the weather conditions are likely to occur. So certainly something that when we receive that type of weather alert, we need to have it in our mind that we're going to take action soon to keep ourselves safe, because again, these conditions likely are going to occur. Then moving up the tier of severity, we see the watch terminology means that a winter storm is possible. And then with our highest tier here of warning, we know that we want to find shelter right away and take the right steps to keep ourselves and our families safe when we receive a warning. That means that a winter storm is occurring or it's imminent. So again, just important as we're figuring out how to best get ourselves prepared, we need to understand what these alerts are. So when we receive them, we don't have to stop, Google them, ask friends, family. We know exactly what actions are most appropriate to take for each of these different tiered warning categories. And before we shift here to our next topic area, we wanted to just take a moment, and I encourage folks to take a screenshot of this slide overcome. But here are some local resources. What you see here is the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. What we want to encourage folks to do is take time to really familiarize yourself with this website. You see different links here, our website on the bottom. And if you're on social media, definitely want to go ahead and follow these different platforms that they have available as an alternative way to get information on emergencies as they are happening. And so we'll shift gears here and we'll spend some time next talking about how to make a preparedness plan specifically custom tailored to winter weather. And so when we talk about making a plan, we really bucket this into four main category areas. One, supplies, two, communications and information, three, evacuation, and then sheltering. And so when it comes to gathering supplies, we have some basic necessities listed out here that across any disaster type, we want to encourage folks to keep stocked and ready to go. So that includes things like non-perishable food, bottled water, medications, first aid supplies, things like that, flashlights, batteries, etc. When it comes to winter weather, though, I do want to make a couple call outs because there are some items that are very important to have, again, with freezing conditions types of events. And we have them bolded on the slide here. So this includes things like extra layers, blankets, gloves, hats, scarves, etc. We'll talk in another slide or two here about the fact that when we're in an extreme winter weather event, we really want to encourage folks to stay inside and to not drive if that's possible. However, you might find yourself in a situation where you are outside when a storm strikes, when that weather comes. And if that's the case, we want to make sure you have your different layers to keep that internal body temperature high. Generators, of course, or a different alternative backup power source. We'll talk more about that, but just some call outs to some winter weather specifics. And again, harkening back to the statistic that we shared out in the beginning of the presentation here, we know that of all injuries that are related to winter weather type of events, we see 70% occur in automobiles and 25% are of those folks that are caught outside during the storm. And so no matter what disaster we're talking about, we could be dealing with an emergency alert that comes from local emergency management professionals that tell us to shelter in place or to evacuate. But specifically with winter weather, it's critical that we have disaster supplies kits in our car. And so you'll see some repeats here again of food, bottled water, medications, and of course also of our extra layers, blankets, etc. But when it comes to your car kit, a couple things to highlight here are ice scrapers, snow brushes, jumper cables, a couple other tow chains, ropes, tire chains. And this one here, of course, we don't want folks to get into a situation where they have to put out an alert using a signal or a flag or a flare. But if you run into an extreme situation where you need to alert professionals that you are in an emergency situation in your car, that's going to be the way to alert folks. And of course, a full tank of gas. And so when pulling together your supplies, we'll keep this pretty quick here, but we do just want to encourage folks to understand that there are different approaches that you can take to pull together your supplies in a way that meets your family's budget, but also your needs. So for example, spreading out purchases throughout the year is one way to do that. When it comes to making an emergency plan, we have this broken down into car tips and home tips because again, we're really trying to hammer home the importance of getting prepared whether you are at home or on the road. When it comes to your car, it is of utmost important that you keep your car in good shape and in proper repair. So if there's anything with your car that needs to get fixed that you've been pushing off, maybe it's something as, light touch as your windshield wipers need to be replaced. Maybe it's time to get your oil changed. Whatever those maintenance actions are, we want to encourage you to take those well in advance of the fall and then of the winter season. Again, going back to the, having that separate emergency supplies kit and keeping the full tank of gas. Jumping down to home tips, the same is true here is that we definitely want to encourage that folks have the supplies that they need. So going through an exercise of checking your emergency supplies kit and keeping any missing items restocked on at least an annual basis, if not more, is going to go a long way in helping to keep you and your family safe throughout winter weather seasons. Shifting gears here, we talked a little bit about different types of populations that experience higher levels of risk with winter weather and freezing conditions events. Older adults are certainly one of those populations. And so some actions that we want to encourage folks to take are, things that we can do around the home. And we'll talk more about different maintenance and inspections actions in a couple slides here. But for example, to call a couple out, this includes things like having a backup power source. We'll walk through generator top tips in a few moments here. Weatherizing your home, ensuring that your home can stay properly heated, but that hot air stays inside the home because your home is properly insulated. That's absolutely critical. And I'll jump down here to knowing the location of your closest emergency warming center. If your home is properly weatherized, if your heating system is in good shape, hopefully this won't be something that you need to utilize, but knowing where that is as a backup is absolutely critical. And we'll shift gears here to talking about protecting the home. And what we typically categorize home protection actions into is three main bucket areas. One, regular inspections and maintenance. Two, pipe protection. If we refer back to Ms. Holloman's story of her pipes having frozen and then subsequently they had burst. And then generators or other backup power sources. When it comes to regular inspections and maintenance actions, we have a larger guide on our website at SVP that walks through in depth what are some of these actions that we can take on an annual basis to better prepare our homes. But some of these quick actions are testing smoke alarms, carbon monoxide detectors, and making sure that they're working properly and in good shape. It's critical also to understand that some of these actions we might be able to take ourselves, but certainly it could be the case that we might want to bring in professionals to do things like examine the insulation, make sure our homes are properly weatherized, and doing things like inspecting the roof as a large action item that again could be most appropriate to bring in outside help. When it comes to protecting your pipe, again, we saw in Ms. Holloman's story that it's so critical to take whatever actions that we can to prevent freezing in the first place. And so, again, we have a larger guide on our website that goes into details. So we'll just call out a few of opening cabinet doors and allowing warm air to circulate. So, again, we prevent pipes from freezing in the first place, turning on faucets, letting them trickle. If those preventative actions have not actually stopped the freezing from occurring, there are steps that you can take to thaw out your pipe so you're not dealing with a burst and then subsequent flooding situation. So this is things like increasing the temperature throughout your home and applying heat to frozen sections of the pipe. Preparing for power outages. We know that power outages can happen at any time throughout the year with any disaster type. And so it's critical that we're taking action to get prepared. And it's absolutely crucial with freezing conditions that can pose extreme health situations for folks. And so, safety during a power outage, a couple top guidance points here are going around your home and unplugging any appliances or electronics again throughout your household. Following generator safety, if a generator is the backup power source that you have identified in advance that you're going to use, and that's going to meet your family's power needs. And then making sure that we are staying as safe as possible and not running the risk of any carbon monoxide poisoning. We don't want to use a gas stovetop or an oven to heat our homes in the event that power is lost. And so we'll just quickly share this story here of a Washington, D.C. resident that shares this story of unfortunately, her and her family knew that they lived in an area that was prone to power outages, but they did fail to take preventative action. Unfortunately, but unsurprisingly, they lost power. And as a result, they lost access to refrigeration, electricity, lights, heat, etc. They shared this quote that as you learn after a disaster, your neighbors are often the first true responders. And so thankfully, they were able to plug into their next door neighbor's generator. But it really is a cautionary tale that we want to share out to folks that it is so critical to understand that this can happen to anyone throughout the country. And it's important to take preventative steps to get prepared. And so as we wrap up here, wanting to just share out at a high level, our last home preparedness action is purchasing a generator or another backup power source. And so our first step that we encourage folks to take is really understand, talk to your family members, walk around your home, understand what your unique household power needs are, assess what is essential. Are there any life-saving, electronic devices that you or household members use? From there, once you have a nice understanding of what those power needs are, then we can go into understanding, doing some research, and we have a great link here of what are those different types of generators at different price points that could meet your family's power needs. And of course, here we want to make sure that if we're operating a generator, we're doing it safely. When we're talking about winter storms, we really are talking about high risks of carbon dioxide poisoning. So it is critical to the safety of you, your family, any pets in your household that you're learning how to use it safely. And so, we'll just share out a couple at a high level here, but one that I want to share is keeping a generator dry and cool before refueling it, leaving a generator outside at least 20 feet away from home, and things like that. And so, as we wrap up our quick 30-minute session today on how to best get prepared for winter weather, we wanted to wrap up by sharing again, it's critical to take time in advance to understand what your risks are, winter weather specifically, but across a variety of different natural hazard types. Making a preparedness plan and custom tailoring that to your family's specific needs. Taking time in advance to protect your home, whether that's preventative action, maintenance actions to take on an annual basis, understanding your family's power needs and having a backup power source at the ready, and knowing that when we're talking about freezing conditions, one risk there is our pipes freezing. So it's, knowing what those actions are to best protect our pipes is critical. And then lastly, we'll go ahead and wrap up some key resources. Again, in our resource hub at SVP, we have a variety of different preparedness and recovery resources that span things like guides and checklists and videos, short form videos, longer recorded videos. And so we certainly encourage you to check that out. And then going back to the New Mexico Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management, there's a wealth of resources on there as well for preparedness actions that we want to encourage folks to check out and familiarize yourselves with. And so I will go ahead and pass it over to Joseph to wrap us up here.
Thank you, Tessa. Thank you all for joining us for today's second session in our four-part disaster preparedness. Before we close, please take a moment to complete the short survey you received. Doing so will enter you into AARP New Mexico's raffle for a disaster supply kit. Here's a quick look at what's coming up next. Session 3, Extreme Heat Preparedness 101, will be hosted on July the 23rd at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. Session 4, Making Your Recovery Plan in Advance, will be hosted on July 30th at 11 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. We look forward to seeing you at the upcoming sessions. Stay safe and stay prepared. Thank you.
Tessa, would you like to take a moment to answer a couple of questions for folks who are still on?
Absolutely. Thanks, Leanne.
Yes. So we had a question from Suzanne that said, last winter, the power grid used by a major internet provider failed. Loss of Wi-Fi and internet became a major problem. Is there any way to prepare for this?
Yeah, and thank you. That's a really important question. A top piece of guidance that I would share out is one way to stay plugged into information sources, because again, it's absolutely critical to understand what different disasters are approaching as they are coming. And so NOAA has a really nice battery powered radio. And so what that means is that in the event that you lose power, we definitely have backup batteries if they're ready, but you'll still be able to stay plugged in. So, it's one way to stay connected to receive incoming alerts.
Thank you, Tessa. And then another question that we got really quickly, what is a good starting point for building personal preparedness for winter weather events?
Yeah, thank you, Leanne. I think so there, and we started off with talking about risks. And so this goes across a variety of different disaster types. But the foundation for getting adequately prepared for disasters to the best of your ability is understanding what your risks are. If we don't understand what different types of disasters can impact our area, and if we don't understand that our risks are changing and that throughout the country we're seeing an increase in the frequency and intensity of a variety of different disaster types, then we're not going to be able to take the right action to get prepared. And so we really keyed in here on winter weather, but next week we'll be talking about extreme heat. And so understanding that we need to get prepared for as well. And so that's not, again, not specific to winter weather itself, but taking time in advance to really study your area's risks and use reliable tools to understand what that risk picture looks like is a great starting point that we typically recommend.
Thank you, Tessa. Those would be all the questions for today.
All right. Thank you, Leanne. And thank you, Joseph, and for all who attended. We really appreciate your time, and we hope folks will join us next week.